mother trousers. Oh.
Mike?
No. Where is it? It's probably down here. It is here.
Gotta warm up. Why is it so cold?
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the speaker series, the first of 2023. We have a special guest tonight. Speaker series we usually do. Stephen Whitson of North Sales. He's going to unveil the behind the PHRF curtain. So Stephen's got extreme experience. Started sailing with Richmond Yacht Club and St Francis Yacht Club. His resume includes a lot of national championships and most certainly several world championships as well. He's been on the PHRF ratings committee for a little over 10 years. And without further ado, I'll hand it over. Thank you.
All right, well, thanks for having me here. Marcus and I were sort of talking about different things that I could talk about, and I can talk about a variety of things. Talking about sail trim, making boats go fast is probably my expertise, but it also kind of puts me to sleep. So wanted to come up with something a little different. If you guys want to talk about sail trim or something else, I'm open to it. I'm not big on presentations, and I'm not big on speaking, and I prefer a more sort of informal, lots of Q&A while I'm talking. So I encourage this to be kind of a smaller group, and it's a small group. So if you have questions on anything, go ahead and ask. You don't have to wait, because I think that's what's going to make this talk more interesting. If it's just me going through what I put on slides, and honestly, what I put on slides is straight out of the guidelines of PHRF, so I just did a lot of cutting and pasting. So there's not a lot of interesting things that you couldn't find there. But I thought I'd put it up on these slides, and we can just kind of talk about what it all means. And kind of go from there. So, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with NorCal PHRF, with PHRF in general. I think most people understand PHRF. NorCal PHRF is a little different from other PHRF regions in the country. We've actually been recognized by U.S. Sailing as probably being one of the more successful PHRF committees. And the reason, and we'll kind of go through that, but the reason is that we are one of the few PHRF committees that's made up of all industry pros. And the benefit of having industry pros, and it is benefit to making a living. I sell sails, I work for North Sales, but it's important to keep racing fair to get more people interested. If it becomes too one-sided, people pull out of the sport, it's detrimental to the marine industry and to our business. We have a committee that is made up of a number of sailmakers, naval architects, and we all counterbalance each other out. And so while there's always the thought that there's favoritism or whatnot, it isn't. And while PHRF is very subjective, I feel like we have some very competent, good people, very experienced people. I'm one of the younger people in the committee, and so there's a lot of experience above me. Anyways, so again, this is right out of the guidelines. I wanted to point this out. The main thing is I put, its sole function of the PHRF committee is to determine the performance potential of yachts in racing applications and provide a handicap value in an attempt to equalize the chances of winning across a broad spectrum of competitors. I put its sole function in red because one of the questions I get often, and maybe one of the misconceptions, is that the PHRF committee runs races. We do not run the races. Organizing authorities run races. Yacht clubs run races. We are just a committee that is creating ratings for fair racing, but we don't tell yacht clubs how to run races. We may make suggestions that it's good to use these ratings for these types of races, because we have, PHRF downwind race ratings, and like a Spinnaker Cup or a Vallejo race where it's downwind, we recommend using downwind ratings. But it's totally up to the yacht clubs to do what they want with the ratings, with their divisions, all of that. So When people come to us and say, oh, you need to run the races this way, or you need to run PHRF that way, or so on, that's not really our responsibility. So anyways, I highlight that just so that people understand that we are just committee doing ratings. We don't do any of the other things. Yeah.
So Steve, you say that's your sole function.
Yeah.
That all makes sense, but you also said you do recommend to racing organizing authorities about what might make sense downwind rating.
Yeah, so
is that an informal process?
That's an informal process. So in PHRF, and I'm not going to cover a lot of this unless you guys have questions on it, but we have downwind ratings. And different regions in PHRF will have different ratings for different sailing courses. Like Southern California will have buoy ratings, they'll have downwind ratings, and then they'll have random leg ratings. Random leg would be a lot of reaching. We just have buoy ratings, which is essentially based on windward leeward, and then we have downwind ratings. And as I mentioned, the downwind ratings are more formula driven. It's a formula that Jim Antrim created years ago, and it's actually, PHRF is totally subjective, but the downwind ratings is actually a scientific rating. And then we look at it subjectively and say, does that make sense? Is that accurate? Do we need to make some alterations here or so on? The downwind rating, the formula actually helps us with our buoy ratings quite a bit because we will plug in the number, get the downwind rating, and say, okay, does that reflect what we think the buoy rating should be? But anyways, your question is with regards to advising yacht clubs. That's a totally informal process. We will suggest, they will ask, like, should we do this, should we do that? So let me just go to the next. So this is our committee. Jim Antrim, Naval Architect, Brooks Dees, Naval Architect. Brooks is trying to retire from the committee. We haven't totally let him go, but he's trying to get out. Bill Colombo, who was a Doyle sailmaker for many years and now the J-boat dealer here in the Bay. Stan Honey, I'm sure most of you guys know him. Cammie Richards, the owner of Pineapple Sails. Robin Sidaro, Hood Sails. Myself, and then Laura, who's the admin for YRA and also is heavily involved in PHRF and keeping us organized and making notes and minutes and changes and whatnot. Laura also, as part of YRA, gets all the permits for all the different yacht clubs, for all their races. She talks to a lot of the yacht clubs. And so when you're sort of asking that informal process, there is that informal process that goes through Laura, a little bit of maybe we would recommend for this type of race to be a downwind race. Just to give you a quick example, the Vallejo race was based on buoy ratings, windward leeward ratings, but it's the majority of the time it's a downwind race. And the J125s, the Santa Cruz 50s, boats like that would clean up.
Is that nice?
Right? So it was just, you get boats. And mainly, in fairness to Michael, it's more J125s that would cherry pick the Vallejo race. And then they wouldn't do the return race because nobody wants to do the return race in a downwind boat, so they motor back and so on. So that's not great. So, an example, we came up with a plan that if you're going to just do the race to Vallejo, you're going to race it under downwind ratings. If you're going to do the race to Vallejo and back, then you're going to use your windward leeward rating. So these are some of the ideas that we come up with on the committee that we suggest. Obviously, that's a Vallejo Yacht Club but YRA run, and since Laura's in charge of YRA, she can implement some of those ideas and changes.
See, in defense of the J125
Yeah.
the Vallejo race is a pretty damn good, the party is a pretty damn good party.
Yeah.
That's probably really why they don't do the Sunday.
Just saying. Yeah.
That sounds like
All right, so that's our committee. And there's all industry professionals. And nothing against the other PHRF regions, but the majority of the regions, some have a few industry professionals, but they're made up mostly of boat owners. And again, nothing against the boat owners, but they only sail their boat. And you have boat owners that have maybe had 3 or 4 boats in their lifetime, but they only sail that boat, where each one of us probably sails, 10 plus boats a year over many, many years, so we have a good feel. Yeah, bro.
How many boats are in the NorCal PHRF system? How many boats?
That's a good question. I don't know. Hundreds, probably.
600 or something?
The PHRF has probably rated more than 600 boats over the years.
But the average annual?
Average annual, I think Laura will issue maybe 300 PHRF, 400 PHRF certificates a year. Now, a lot of those are renewals. And I would just guess that we probably rate, and a big difference, or a big number will come from the Pack Cup, because we'll get a lot of boats from Southern California, Vancouver, Seattle, that need to get a PHRF rating to do the Pack Cup. That we will maybe rate 100 or more boats a year. Yeah.
One of the fun things is when we get the boats, and I do a lot with Pack Cup, as some folks know. When we get folks coming up from Southern California, they have very little trust in Southern California PHRF because they perceive it as inside the pool, as they put it. And I think they tend to be pleasantly surprised that our local Northern California PHRF actually does a very professional job. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. We try. I'm involved. I have a lot of clients. I do a lot of sailing in Southern California. And Southern California is a hard place to rate because it's such a big area. And the hearsay just travels. And it gets worse from San Diego to Santa Barbara, Santa Barbara to San Diego. And it gets pretty bad. But they are largely a committee and a number of people, but boat owners. And I think that's sort of where they fail, is that because they only know their boats and they don't understand some of these different boats, that they have a really hard time of getting fair ratings. So Southern Californians will definitely be maybe more cautious as a result. All right, so again, I just kind of pulled this right out of what the requirements are. Nothing really big to talk about, other than the point of all this is that the more, if you get your boat rated, and especially if it's a custom boat or a boat that's not very familiar or very few of in the area, the more information you can give us, the more accurate your rating is going to be. So you may think that you may get a better rating with providing very little information, but a lot of times it could go the opposite direction, and we will err on the opposite direction. If we don't have good information, there's a good chance you're not going to get as good a rating. And I have to say, most of the people that apply that come up with a custom one-off boat or something that is unfamiliar do a pretty good job of sending pictures, and we look for pictures of the underbody, we look at pictures of the rig, the deck layout, the hull shape, and we try to find other boats to compare it to kind of get an idea of what the boat, how the boat will sail, and what the boat would do in certain conditions. So anyways, that's the point of that. Anyone who complains about their rating, I always encourage them to get an ORC, ORR, or IRC rating, because we have conversion formulas for that. And that won't be the sole reason of the rating that you get, but it certainly gives us a guideline of where your rating may be. We'll use, and we'll talk a little bit about this, but we'll use maybe 6, 8 different sort of data points on how we decide a rating. But having a scientific rating and converting that to our PHRF formula will definitely help. So again, if you don't like your rating, don't have good information to back it up, go get a scientific rating, ORR, IRC, and then we can use that to convert. And we found a few boats that have really too good of a rating under PHRF, and once we got their ratings, their ORR ratings, we found that they're, were much faster than we thought they were. All right, so last point, just filling out the form. I'm sure you guys all know how to fill out the forms pretty complete, but we will get people that just half-ass the forms, and then we have to kick it back, and it just makes it difficult. So All right, I can't really see that. I had to get one picture. I could not find any good pictures. I had to get one picture in my presentation here. So, all right.
Excuse me. What is ORR?
ORR is just a scientific rule based off VPPs. So ORR is used often on more Grand Prix type racing, offshore racing. Transpac uses ORR. Pac Cup uses ORR for the bigger, faster boats. ORR is run out of U.S. sailing. It's slowly getting taken over by ORC, which is extremely popular in Europe and becoming more popular in the U.S. But they're all VPP oriented ratings, and that's all based off of measurements in a scientific formula. So that's what ORR is.
And it's $1,000 more.
Yeah, you have to get the boats inclined, meaning you have to see what the stability of the boat is. So you have to hire a measurer, to weigh the boat, to incline the boat, to measure the water lines and so on. But it's the only way to really get an accurate sense of what the boat really is. And so, again, if you don't like your PHRF rating, then give us some data to work with. And that is good data to work with. Yeah.
So you mentioned sometimes the forms aren't filled out.
Yeah.
Really, very
Yeah.
in much completion.
Yeah.
And so you're getting back, but so many boats have already been rated. What drives that? Is it because the sale plan might be a little different for a similar boat?
So most people will take the brochure, even if it's an old boat, and use that. And a lot of times that information isn't very accurate. So that's one of the biggest things we'll see in sort of discrepancies in a rating of the boat is they will take the brochure displacement of the boat, and then the boat actually weighs quite different. And that's why we have certified downwind ratings for Pacific Cup. The boat actually has to be weighed. And again, if you weigh your boat, you'll find often the boats will be heavier than what the naval architect or the builder said it would be.
Yeah.
So it's actually a benefit to get your boat weighed. Where we have the biggest issue are the sail measurements, the girth measurements, and we get it because not everybody knows how to measure a sail. Nobody wants to take the time to measure a sail. I mean, someone with a basic Catalina 30, is not going to go down there and measure. Those sails are pretty basic, but that information is important. So something needs to be put in there, and often we'll see errors where it just doesn't compute. And then it's like, okay, does this guy really have an oversized sail? Or did he just put that incorrectly? We have to call him, is this what you mean? So the best thing you can do in the notes section is say, this is what I think it is, or this is where I got this information, or I really don't know, or whatever, and then we can work with that. But sail measurements are probably the biggest issue. Displacement is probably the second biggest issue. Yeah, Ron?
Do you assume a specific sail inventory for each of these boats?
So it's good. We have assumptions, and I'm going to kind of go through the assumptions.
Okay.
So here's kind of the start. We're rating primarily San Francisco Bay conditions. As you know, San Francisco can be extremely windy, and in the Corinthian midwinters it can be extremely light, right? So we take that all into account, and it's hard, right? I mean, how do you rate a boat for lighter and heavier? But we think about sort of, okay, if this boat was sailing the Corinthian midwinters, this boat's from Corinthian Yacht Club, so they're probably going to do the Corinthian midwinters. That's probably what they're going to spend most of their time doing in Friday night races. So we're going to look at that as part of rating the boat. So there's a lot of things that we will look at there. There's kind of the wind velocities. The one thing that maybe people don't understand, and we get this question we were talking about earlier, my boat rates this in New England, my boat rates this in Southern California, why does it rate this here in San Francisco? Well, one factor is that when the wind gets light in San Francisco Bay, the water gets flat. When the wind gets light in San Diego, the lump, the swell, is quite large. And it has tremendous impact on the performance of certain boats. If you're sailing in big chop and no wind versus flat water and no wind. So that's something that we look at as well. That's why you may see a rating in San Diego be totally different from a rating in San Francisco, even though we may look at it for light air. Again, windward leeward is what we look at. We are looking more at these modern boats that reach, you've seen these new Beneteaus, Genoes, whatnot, twin rudders, big chines, wide stern, the whole deal. His boats don't go upwind all that great, but they reach really, really well. So we are definitely taking that into consideration. Sort of like, okay, how would this boat go tacking up the city front? Now, how would this boat go reaching towards Vallejo? You know, and so while this is in the guidelines, we do look at the reaching capabilities of boats more and more. You know, and you get, sometimes you get like a Columbia 57, totally heavy, totally underpowered. This boat is, you know, super slow, but there will be that Fairlance race where it's blowing 18 and that thing is just going to waterline reach really, really well. So we kind of have to take a look at some of that as well. Okay, so, and I have more of a list of the assumptions, but we, you know, are assuming that the bottom is in good shape, the sails are in good condition, the propeller folds or feathers properly. There is a rating credit for a non-folding three-bladed prop, so if you have that, you want to make note of that. Let's see. Just to get you run to your sail inventory question, we're just assuming that your sails are in good condition, but we're also assuming that you have all the sails. We have had, you know, rating discussions where a certain boat goes out and the rating is too fast for what the boat is, but then you see them going out sailing and they're using a furling Jenniker to go downwind, and it's like, that is not going to perform like a proper spinnaker. That's not our problem. That is, you know, the boat's problem. It's not equipped with the proper sail for that condition. So we are assuming that you have all the sails needed for all the different angles that you'll be sailing. We understand, and the removal of cushions is in there, so we understand that most boats will remove their cushions. We will look at, yeah, some people will take their head door out. That's really not going to compute in a rating. But we don't expect you to have a Catalina 36 fully stripped out, all the drawers, you know, shelving, everything removed from the boat. So that, if you have a boat that's like that, you need to let the PHRF committee know on the application. If you don't let them know and you have a boat like that, then consider that cheap. All right. Yeah.
Point 8, the yacht is expected to be competently sailed.
Yes.
So
that's a great area, huh?
you know, I'm racing a fleet that we feel really chuffed about ourselves when we're racing against other boats, and
Yeah.
then a couple of the boats come out with pros on board, and
Yeah.
all of a sudden it's a situation of, well, that's what we should be doing.
Yeah.
How does that convey across, particularly the higher participated in fleets? Because some of those fleets are perceived to have gift ratings, and some of it potentially could relate to that.
Well, I mean, that's a great point. I mean, that's, I'm trying to think of the right way to say it, but it's sort of like the whole point of this, you know, if you're sailing one design, you probably have a good idea of who's going to win the races or do well in the regattas. When you're in PHRF, it's hard, right? And I have this note, which I'll just kind of skip, but the main point of this is that PHRF rates the boat, not the sailors, right? So if there is a boat out there winning, is it winning because it has a good crew and it's well sailed or they sail smart, or is it because the rating is not fair? We don't look, and it's hard when it's a custom boat. If you have a custom boat and you're well sailed, that's tough. Like rating Hank Easom's boats is tough, you know, because you know he knows where to go, he sails his boat well, he prepares his boat well. Are we giving him the fairest rating? You know, obviously he's a good sport, so he doesn't complain, but there may be some of the boats he's had that, you know, maybe the ratings weren't as good because he's being penalized for being so well prepared and being a good sailor. But the point is that we rate the boat. We don't rate the sailor. We use results to determine a lot of our ratings, and if you don't like your rating and you appeal, you need to bring in results to show. But if you have a production boat and we can look at a variety of boats, that makes it a lot easier. But I mean, I know what you're asking. I hope that sort of answers. One thing I'll mention is YRA uses jibe set. And the nice thing about jibe set is that, and this is one of the tools we use when we rate boats, and especially with appeals, if someone says this boat's rating is not as good or my rating's not as good, is we can change the ratings, plug it into results, and see how that boat does. And sometimes we can subtract 9 seconds or add 9 seconds to a boat and find that the results don't change or change minimally. And this is across the board, the whole season of like 18 races, and we'll plug this in and maybe it changed the results of 3 races, but you'll find like that boat was just really well sailed. You can penalize them even more, but they're still winning the races. So that's one of the tools that we use. So that kind of answer? Yeah. Does that work for everybody else? Or? Yeah, that makes sense? Yeah, Blake.
See, I think it's also maybe appropriate to just comment or talk about that, the conditions for a certain race. You talked about downwind or buoy racing ratings, but you could do a delta ditch run and find, for example, that in any given year, the more 24s clean up and take the top 10 spots. And everyone says, oh, it's the rating.
Yeah.
But it just happens to align for that particular boat. Where it's not the rating necessarily system, it's just the conditions. Can you think and talk about that perhaps?
Yeah, so that kind of makes me think a little bit of what I would call an asymmetrical boat. Not a boat that has an asymmetric spinnaker, but a boat that does very well in one condition and very poorly in another condition. So I can give you a good example. I sailed on a Swan 53, beautiful cruising boat, and the owner decided he wanted to race. And so we put pros on the boat. We built great sails for the boat. We did a lot of optimizing to the boat to really make it sail better. It's still a big cruising boat, 54,000 pounds. Air conditioning, heat. The boat was slower than an Express 37 in anything under 9 knots. I mean, you just couldn't tip the boat over. It was just such a pig. So Express 37 rates 72. Yep. There you go. Right? So, I mean, we were doing OYRA races, going out in like 6 knots, 5 knots of breeze, which is so common to go out there, and the swell, and this boat is just sitting there and you're watching Express 37s, those rockets, sailing by. Just to give you an idea, the boat rated, I think, 30, and then we put articulating spinnaker pole on it because it had asymmetric spinnaker, so it rated 27. And we're watching boats that rate 72 sail by us. Now, on the flip side, the boat powered up nicely at about 14 knots. Anything over 18, it just crushed. So it would just go so much better upwind VMG than a Santa Cruz 52 or whatnot. Downwind is still pretty slow, but upwind, it really would sail well. So this boat rating 27 would actually sail faster than boats that rated 0 or minus 12. The point is, and kind of getting back to that, is that if it was a windy day, we knew we were pretty much going to win unless we sailed poorly. And if it was a lighter day, we knew it was a very slim chance that we would be even competitive. So that's sort of where I get. So the more 24s in a delta ditch, if it's the right condition, they have symmetric spinnakers, they can sail, they don't have to jibe so much. Amelga's 20, has to jibe and zigzag or whatnot. The Wabbits are another good example. They can sail downwind. Olsen 25, those rockets are pretty good for that race too. But yeah, you're going to have races that are going to have certain conditions, and the boats are always going to do well. And people will say, like, the Wabbits have such a great rating, or the Moors have such a great rating. But then other races, they just don't compete as well.
Right. And equally, on a given year, it may be a flood versus an ebb.
Well, that's a big factor.
And that's a big factor that you can't necessarily take into account in rating a boat.
No, and again, we have industry pros on these committees that understand that. So when someone's talking about like, oh, that boat's rating is unfair, or my rating's terrible, it's like, well, you were sailing on a flood tide, or, so we have to look at that. Like, okay, these are the results. We're looking at results from the Curtian midwinters. Like, how fluky was that race? Well, I wasn't there. Who was, okay, you were there. How fluky was the race? It was terrible. Don't use those results. Oh, that other one was Gold Gate Midwinter, 50 knots, perfect. We can use that. So there's a lot of that. And that's, again, we have people from around the bay. You got, Cammie and Bill over in Alameda and Jim over at Richmond Yacht Club. I'm more over here. And, so we kind of do these different events. We talk, if we don't, we talk to people that have done the events. And so we kind of have a sense of what's going on. So when people complain like, oh, I got, didn't do well, sometimes I'll be out there and be like, yeah, you had that big rap in your kite. So,
Is there or has there ever been consideration, like we've got a downwind rating and I'll say normal rating.
Yeah.
If you think of horse racing, which is a pretty heavily handicapped event, they counteract potential based on current conditions. Is there consideration, or has there been consideration for having more rating inputs? So a race committee can go, okay, the tide is this, the wind condition, average wind conditions were this. We're using X rating or an adjustment factor because most other areas that have a rating system, their wind conditions and tide conditions are pretty consistent.
Yeah.
We're going to have that luxury, right?
So it's a good question. Scientific ratings do more of that. ORC will have different ratings for different wind conditions. The Big Boat Series, which always use some scientific rating, since IMS would have just a single wind matrix, which was terrible because you'd have a morning race, which was light, and then you have an afternoon race, which was windy, and you'd have different currents, and it just wasn't accurate. St. Francis finally started using the different sort of categories or ratings for the different conditions. That's what ORC does. They'll have like a light, they'll have a medium, they'll have a heavy. Now they're using 5. They'll have a light medium, a medium heavy, a heavy medium. So they'll have those different ratings for the different conditions. It opens up a whole other can of worms. But anyways, not to get too far off topic, PHRF is not that sophisticated. And PHRF really is so that we can beer can race on a somewhat even level. And if you want to get that particular, then you need to be racing a scientific rule, right? Now, a lot of yacht clubs are not using scientific rules, so PHRF is kind of all we have. So while a lot of people will say it's not that great, it's obviously good enough because that's what the majority of the clubs are using, so it's pretty good. Time on time is probably the closest change, and I don't know how long we've had time on time, but for a long time it's always time on distance, and then finally they have time on time, so that's helped a bit. But no, I don't think that's an area that we want to get into. I mean, we're a volunteer committee that meets once a month, and our meetings generally go for about 3 hours. And I mean, if we were to do that and establish that many ratings for boats, then it just would never happen. And it would be more arguments and whatnot. We do ratings every 3 seconds. You can make a case like this boat, should be 1 second faster because it has this, whatever. I always look at it as like, boy, if we were within 6 seconds, that's pretty good. I mean, we're talking a mile leg. I mean, 6 seconds is, half, 3/4 of boat length, depending on what boat you're on. I mean, there's so many things that can go into it. So while people will complain like, oh, that boat's 3 seconds off, or it's sort of like, okay, sure. All right, so,
You mentioned time on time being time on distance.
yeah,
Time on time formula
yeah,
incorporates factors such as the distance or the length of the course and the spread of the fleet, but
Yeah.
most race communities don't adjust that.
yeah.
Is that something that race communities need to be educated on, or dot, dot, dot?
Maybe, that's not my expertise. So what's your familiarity, Michael? Do you have any input on that? I don't know about, I mean, I'm sure there's ways you can make it better, and I'm sure that yacht clubs could probably put those factors in, you know, based on the courses they're using. Maybe that's something you can experiment with in one of your regattas, right? I mean, back to the point that PHRF committee is not the organizing authority for this, and you know, we will give you sort of ideas of what we think, but it's up to the yacht clubs to experiment. And there's so many different directions, and we've talked about it, but I mean, you could give rating benefits, credits, or whatever for less crew, you know, so that we can get more people out sailing with less crew, if that's going to get more boats out. Like, our whole goal is to get more boats. Obviously, it's self-motivated because that's our business, but we all love sailing. It's the health of the sport. The more boats we can get out there, the better. So if you get a credit because you have females on the boat, or, you know, mixed crews, what a great idea. You know, the Curtian Yacht Club can put that in their notice of race and implement that. And if it's a bad idea, they can it. And if it's a good idea, other yacht clubs catch on. I mean, these are ideas that clubs can do, but they're the ones that need to implement this. It's not PHRF. Now, if you came to us and said, I've got this idea, you know, what if we had weight limits, or what if we had ratings for this certain condition, or what if we had credits for, you know, or penalties for pros on boats or whatever, you say, okay, well, yeah, if you had a pro, it might be worth this much, and you could put that in your notice of race, and you can try it out, and people like it, great. And if they don't, then, you know, get rid of it. But I encourage experimenting, just whatever is going to help get more participation, more people happy about the sport.
We've done a number of things here.
Yeah.
From time to time, we've tried a few wacky things, and they haven't gone over well. The big deal, of course, is I think we're the largest purveyor of non-spinnaker classes.
Yeah.
And this has been an item we've been debating with PHRF for decades.
Yeah.
You know, you guys don't do PHRF non-spinnaker ratings. Some committees do.
We do.
And we don't. And there's a number of boats and classes where we differ profoundly on how to rate them, and we just don't let them race non-spinnaker here. Or, and this is always fun because it leads to a lot of debate. We say, sure, you can race non-spinnaker, and we're going to change your rating. And then they freak out.
Yeah.
But it's the only way to make it fair in some cases.
Well, I think, you know, the St. Francis has their club race once a year, and it's a non-spinnaker, and they will do what they want to what they think is appropriate to rate the boats, and that's great. Now, if it's one person that doesn't really know, it's not so great. You can have a lot of unhappy people, but sometimes they'll reach out to people like myself and say, what do you think about this? I'm like, yeah, it looks good. You should do it. Try it.
So you can find a Santa Cruz 50 a rating with and without spinnaker. Can I get that from the PHRF?
You know, so Michael says we don't rate, and we do what we don't. I should clarify, we have guidelines for non-spinnaker racing, and I didn't put any of that here, but it's in the guidelines, and I'll just give you a couple of examples. If you have a boat with a furler, you do not get a credit for the furler in the standard PHRF rating. If you raise non-spinnaker, there's actually you get a credit for having a furler. There's all kinds of restrictions in the guidelines of how you can sail non-spinnaker. So those things need to be looked at. I know that, Michael, we've had emails about what boats should be rated non-spinnaker or what are rated spinnaker. And I'll bring it up, but the Alarian 28 does not allow spinnakers in their class racing, but it is rated with a spinnaker. So its rating, if a guy goes out there with a spinnaker, its rating doesn't change. It should not raise the non-spinnaker, it's a spinnaker boat. There's only, and it's designated in the list. If you go to the PHRF website, there's a list of all the boats, and there's only a handful, but they are designated to be rated as a non-spinnaker boat. And those are like star boats, because they just aren't rigged for spinnakers. NARS, not very many, maybe a couple of those, maybe folk boats, I don't even know. But like, there's maybe a few. There's not very many, you have to really look through the list. But like Alarians, everyone thinks like, oh, it's a non-spinnaker boat because they don't raise spinnakers in the class, and no one really ever uses them. But if they go out sailing and they'll sail non-spinnaker and someone shows up with a spinnaker, they rate the same, because that's how we rated it.
And we disagree.
So
Yeah, and you can do that.
You can have a boat that's rated on spinnaker.
Yeah.
But if I have a boat, like a 50,
Yeah,
that's generally rated with spinnaker,
yeah.
can I get
A non-spinnaker rating?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's up to what the club wants to give that boat for its non-spinnaker
I
rating.
can't get that from the committee.
We are not doing
that. They're consistent on that. Other PHRF committees will give you a spinnaker and non-spinnaker rating. They don't, which is annoying for us, but they are consistent.
Yeah, yeah. So, but I think the main thing is to look at the guidelines of what is allowed to sail non-spinnaker, because I think there's a lot of people that are out there sailing with sails they would consider be a Genoa when it's actually more of an asymmetric spinnaker.
And there was an effort, we won't mention the class, that they tried to get you guys to say we're not allowed to do that, and we talked.
Okay.
And you guys said, if you guys are running a non-spinnaker race, you guys can make your own rules, which we did.
Yeah, yeah. And again, I encourage Jacobs to make their rules if they see fit, if it's going to make racing better and more fair. Marcus?
Sorry, you
Yeah.
mentioned the Larian
Oh.
rates.
Oh, don't.
And I don't know why you raised that.
Okay,
But you also said that they
we could end
should
that.
race non-spinnaker. Oh, sorry, should race spinnaker.
They should race spinnaker with the ratings that they have.
And in the minutes of October 2017,
Yeah.
the PHR committee said that they should rate as non-spinnaker.
Nope.
Okay, then that's,
So
that,
the rating is back then. Before then, yes, they were like a Wiley Cat and those sorts of boats.
yeah. A Wiley Cat is rated, even if they don't carry a spinnaker, it's rated as a boat with a spinnaker, right?
But expressly in the minutes of October 2017,
Yeah.
it said that the 28s changed that assessment and they can race as non-spinnaker boats. It should be rated as non-spinnaker boats.
Yeah, but that's right.
Okay.
So that, and I think that's where Michael's issue.
Okay, so that's, we've had a discussion about it more recent than then. And I don't know, because I don't recall that exact one. No, and that's fine, but I know the more recent discussion, because this was a topic a while ago, but not that far back, that it is rated as a spinnaker boat, just like the Wiley Cat, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, so,
I'll chase that.
all right. But you might remind me so that maybe that could be noted somewhere on the website for Laura to put in.
I mean, the truth of the matter is, everybody, and we've seen this in so many classes, in so many individual boats, you know, they've got a story about why their rating should be better.
Yeah.
And the number of times, I was race chair for many years, the number of times people would make a change and say, it shouldn't matter. And you always ask the same question. Did you make the change to make the boat go slower?
Right, right. Yeah, Ron.
Ron. So I'm going to ask you a different question. I may be the only person in here who started racing in the last 12 months.
Okay.
Maybe the last 8 months. And, you know, it's interesting, when you start racing and you're not really ready for spinnaker, you want to take your boat out anyway in the non-spinnaker classes.
Yeah.
And, you know, plenty of boats are completely uncompetitive. And, you know, my boat can't go any deeper than 120 without a spinnaker, right? So, you know, it's interesting that there's not a non-spinnaker rating for, you know, as we are trying to engage a new generation in racing, because one generation is sort of aging out, and a new generation is trying to be recruited. It's tough to start in the spinnaker class. It might be worth thinking about a non-spinnaker rating for boats that would get people, you know, into the beginner racing a little bit earlier. It's tough to race a spinnaker, I've learned.
Yeah,
Jim says you can do it.
we can do it.
I'm just throwing it out there as a thought, because
Yeah.
we're trying to recruit new racers.
Right.
I've had to take some extraordinary efforts to try and learn how to sail spinnaker, otherwise I'm just not competitive.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a good point, and it's something that we could do. Again, we're not trying to do everything because we are pretty maxed out as we are. But anyways, all right, Marcus, is this time to go or? Okay. All right. So this is my last one, anyways. So how to optimize your rating? All right. Just look at the bottom. These items are unrated because they're just assumed. Like you want to go faster, boat prep, rig tune, clean bottom, getting all the extra gear off your boat that doesn't need to be there. You know, good, decent sails, boat handling, crew work. I mean, this is all going to add up a lot more than the appeal to your rating. So, you know, these are things that we assume, that you know how to sail your boat, you know how to sail your boat well, and all these things are done. If they're not, you're going to have a not so great argument if you want to change your rating. So, anyways, all right, Blake.
On the weight,
Yeah.
I guess I've always understood PHRF is how you sail the boat, and a lot of people put in their brochure weightings.
Yeah.
Don't necessarily throw on all the sails and other gear.
Yeah.
So while it makes sense to take out the excess weight over what you reported,
Yeah.
is that true?
So when we look at the weight of the boat, and this is exactly how we do the downwind ratings, the certified downwind ratings where the boats are weighed. Basically, the concept is if you were to take your boat upside down, shake it, and everything that falls out, that's how you weigh your boat. So when you put the displacement for your boat and you're getting off the brochure, or you know whatever the known weight is, you're not including all the safety gear, all your dishes, all your whatever, you know, foul weather gear and whatnot. That should not be on there.
Gotcha.
If you were to put that on as part of your displacement, then that's not accurate.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Anything else? Express 27, Olson 25 questions. Express 37, Andy?
Yeah.
All right.
I will say, it is interesting that just from being PHRF Northwest for the last 35 years, just to listen to you tonight, how different. And when you very first walked in, you were talking about how Southern California's kind of gone off in their direction.
Yeah.
And you guys are doing your thing. And PHRF Northwest, just for example, I think it's either 15 seconds or 18 seconds. So if you have a spinnaker,
Yeah.
you can just put on there, I got a spinnaker. And if you don't, then they just say, all right, we got 18-second credit or a 15-second credit or whatever it is. So boats have two ratings. They have their rating with a kite and without a kite. And it's 15 or 18 seconds. I can't remember which. You know, for a standard one, was 210% kite or whatever it is. But anyway, but yeah, it's interesting, it's dynamic, and I really appreciate you coming down tonight and helping explain how it works, because there is a lot of misconceptions, and people, like you're talking the difference in how scuttlebutt travels between Santa Barbara and San Diego. It's nice, you know, if you're not sure, call one of those, whatever the 13 people that are up there and talk to them, because you guys do pick up the phone generally.
Yeah, and you know, one thing I always say, and I'll tell you guys too, is we actually encourage appeals because it's just it's a check to see if what we did was correct. And it's sometimes, especially if it's a custom boat, you're gonna miss. And if you don't have the data, it's hard sometimes with these boats. And if you can get data results, all the different things, ratings, whatever, to back it up, then we can go back and get a more accurate rating. And I'll tell you real quick is what we do from time to time is we may get an appeal on one boat, or we may just, if we have some time, we will look at a class of boats, a group of boats, and while one boat is being singled out for a rating, we will look at the 8, 10, whatever number of boats it sails against, and say, okay, if we were to change this rating, what is that going to do to the results of that class? What is that going to do to the other boats? If we change this boat's rating, now this guy has a case to change his rating, this guy has a case to change his rating. if we change this one boat's rating, does it even make sense? And a lot of times that's how we look at it. It's like, no, because we're gonna end up having to change more than half the fleet's rating based on what someone is saying. And so it's very easy to single out a boat and just say, okay, this boat is rating is incorrect. But then when you compare it to all the other boats and the results and how it does, and you look and you end up having to change a bunch of boats' ratings, it's sort of like, okay, what are we doing here? We're just gonna muck everything up. So that's definitely one thing that we look at, is just rating a number of similar boats together and see how they fit together, and looking at the results of the different races that they'll compete in.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I would say the San Francisco PHRF committee is far more engaged and professional than the others that I've seen around the country. So I don't know if there's any people here with a bone to pick, but I think you're in a much better position here to appeal any issues you have with the ratings than you'd be in most other places in the country. Because Stephen was right, most of the other committees are made up of boat owners and people with some vested interest in the success of those boats. And I don't really see that with the people I've known on that committee over the last 30 years or so. So whether you like it or not, it's as good as it probably gets anywhere in the country. So that or race one design, really.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. It was fun to talk about it, and you can reach out to me anytime if you have any questions.
Thank you very much. Despite what you may have heard at the bar, you do not get 3 seconds bonus on your rating for attending. Definitely like to thank Sid so much for his contribution tonight, and sharing the inner workings of the PHRF committee, how ratings are assessed and appealed. Perhaps sales trim may have been a more simplistic topic. Ron Young's got a small announcement.
So you may have noticed that a couple of years ago, Yellow Bluff went off station, and YRA, which does a lot on a shoestring budget, has not had the bucks to replace it. So a few of us raised the money and built a new buoy, and next Tuesday it goes on station, and it will be called Hank Eason. And Hank saw the buoy for the first time about a week and a half ago. His health has been, not doing so well, so we didn't want to wait too long to show it to him. When he came out of the hospital, we showed it to him the next day. So you're all invited to come up next Tuesday, the 7th of February, at 10 o'clock. The Army Corps will have put it in, and there will be an informal parade around that buoy, the new Hank Eason buoy. So we have a weather mark on the southern beach, southern shore, all top black collar. We have a new one named Hank Eason beginning next Tuesday, the 7th.
Awesome.
And thank you everybody for attending. The next speaker series, I think, is next week.
Yes. Next Thursday.
So look forward to seeing you all here.
Randall Reeves, I've seen him present. He does a great job. So do come to that. And yeah, just dude, DM.
All right.
Good going, my dear.